session, our groups will get topic microeconomic problems in Malaysia, effects of COVID-19 and how to overcome the problem. So microeconomics is a branch of economics that study the overall behavior and performance of the economy. In contrast, macroeconomics focus on the economic phenomena such as inflation, price levels, economic growth rate, national income, and gross domestic product or GDP, and employment changes. Besides, in this report, we will explain about the background of nations such as population, national income, and main sector contribution. And other than that, the main discussion we will discuss inflation, overview of inflation and employment of the country, provide with data, pie graph, and about the inflation and employment during COVID-19 effect in the year 2019 until 2022. After that, our group talk about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and endemic on inflation and employment in Malaysia. Lastly, we use monetary and fiscal policy to overcome the problem of inflation and employment.
So the next one is the background of the country. The first one, let's look at the population in Malaysia. As you can see in the graph, Malaysia's population increased from 23.49 million people in 2011 to 29.34 million in 2012. So the total population comprised about 7.79 million people below the age of 15 years, 20.3 million in the economically productive age group of 15 to 64 years, and 1.5956 million elderly people aged 65 years and above. The proportion of the population residing in urban areas increased from 62% in 2000 to 63.5% in 2011. This trend towards greater urbanization of the population is indicative of the growing economic opportunities and better social amenities in the urban areas. Besides these vital statistics, Malaysia's per capita income at the current price has increased from RM13,418 in the year 2011 to 31,215 in 2012. The poverty rate has reduced from 8.5% in 1999 to 1.7% in 2012.
Before we go further about national income, let me explain a bit about what is national income. National income is defined as the total monetary worth of all services and goods produced by a country during a given time period. In other words, it is the total of all sector income created within a given production year. National income is a measure of the country's economic activity, and it can be computed using one of three methods: income, value added, or expenditure. The income technique is primarily dependent on the earnings generated by producing variables such as labor and land. The expenditure technique is based on investment and consumption, but the value added method is primarily concerned with the value added to a product during the manufacturing process. In terms of economic growth, the impact from the crisis of COVID-19 have been severe. The national economy contracted by 70.1% year-on-year in 2020, the steepest amount since the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis in 1998, and it is getting worse since our country was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic that started in 2020. According to the Trading Economic Official website, Gross National Product (GNP) in Malaysia increased to RM374.70 billion in the third quarter of 2020 from RM358.70 billion in the second quarter of 2022. Overall, growth was negative in the third quarter of 2021, but this was offset by high domestic demand, improving labor and income market condition, and sustained governmental support. Besides, as stated by the central bank, the economy grows by 1.9% on a seasonally adjusted basis from quarter to quarter. Nation's GDP expanded 9.3% in the first 3 quarters of 2022. Moving on to the main economic sector in Malaysia. The economy is distributed into 3 major sectors. The first one is the agriculture or primary sector, the secondary or industry sector, and the last one is the service or tertiary sector. Because it involves the extraction of raw resources, the primary sector is sometimes known as the extraction sector. This can include renewable resources like fish, wool, and wind power. It could also be the usage of non-renewable resources such as oil extraction and coal mining. Primary industries dominate in developing economies with many people employed in agriculture and mining.
So, the impact of coronavirus pandemic or endemic on inflation and employment of Malaysia. As we know, the inflation rate from 1975 to 2030 were dropping, right? You can see in this graph. And unemployment rate from 2030 to 2090 June 2020 were increasing because of COVID-19. The basic theoretical foundations of Phillips curve can be understood by using the concept of labor demand on supply. If labor demand is greater than the labor supply, the excessive demand for labor can put upward pressure on the wage rate, which will cause the high inflation in Malaysia. In this situation, it would be easy for workers to find unemployment and the employment rate would remain at the low level. By contrast, if labor supply exceeds labor demand, the surplus of labor supply would push the wage down, which would result in a lower inflation rate in the country. At the same time, with the excessive labor supply, it would be difficult for workers to find job and unemployment would be at a high level. Malaysia's first COVID-19 case was detected on 25 January 2020. By March, the number of new daily coronavirus infections had risen significantly, prompting the Malaysian government to announce the nationwide movement restrictions on 18 March 2020. Despite initially doing well in curbing infection rates with the nationwide movement restrictions, gradually realized by May 2020. Unexpectedly, a new wave of infections started in September 2020. The case numbers have ballooned again. It's quite difficult to calculate and estimate the direct marginal economic impact of COVID-19 before the pandemic hit the country of Malaysia. That was maintained at the same time level from 2018 to early 2020. After the COVID-19 spread throughout Malaysia, the government had to order government control. There was a massive closure of business in reaction to the economic crisis that was destroyed and was at a rather bad level in early April 2019. This resulted in a very bad impact on Malaysian people, where it has occurred rising unemployment and poverty in the country. Over the next few months, the vast majority of businesses lost access to foreign exchange and imports. The following has affected households facing restrictions in accessing their bank accounts, and remittance have declined as a result of the oil crisis in Peninsular Malaysia. According to a study, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the labour market. Job losses and reduction in working hours implemented by employers as cost-cutting measures were observed in almost all industries affected by unemployment for the year 2020 at 800,000, increase from 508,000 for year 2019, or unemployment rate increased 5.3% from 20.3% as reported by the Department of Statistics Malaysia. The year 2020 was a challenging year for most countries around the world. Besides the airline industry, many industries in Malaysia also affected by a pandemic. According to unemployment insurance system, loss of employment in Malaysia increased drastically. Many industries affected by the movement control order. The top 3 most affected industries being the manufacturing industry, followed by the wholesale and retail industries. And finally, the accommodation and food beverage sectors. Many other industries underwent a similar retrenchment process. The main causes for these losses were downsizing, constituting 28% of total loss of employment, followed by business closure, company financial problems, and other issues as shown in graph 3. However, key structural factors suggest that the impact of Malaysia's consumer inflation would likely be relatively contained at this juncture. Firstly, while higher global energy prices have contributed significantly to inflation in many countries, the direct impact has been contained in Malaysia. This is due to price interventions, namely price controls on retail fuel and electricity
tariff regulations, which have mitigated the impact of consumer prices despite surging global crude oil and coal prices. More recently, price controls on key food items have further alleviated the price pressures for consumers. Secondly, shipping costs have risen globally, but the severity has been less in regional Asian economies. This is because cost increase to regional Asian economies have been relatively contained, in part of reflecting the proximity to the global manufacturing hub.
How to overcome the problem of inflation and unemployment. So, monetary policies refer to the actions of central bank to achieve macroeconomic policies objectives such as price stability, full employment, and stable economic growth. Fiscal policies refer to the tax and spending policies of the federal government. Monetary policy to overcome inflation. Monetary policy to overcome inflation. Number 1, reducing money supplies in the economy. Venezuela, Sudan, and Zimbabwe experienced hyperinflation because they were creating money incessantly and without regard for its values. As a result, they had to replace their national currencies with alternatives such as the American dollar, which is today more stable. Number 2, open market operation. This is the process of selling government bonds, which is carried out by the central banks during an inflationary period. Bank Negara Malaysia sells securities to the general public, especially to investors who must sell their holdings because the price will drop, making it impossible for them to profit and ultimately leading to no one buying their securities. Fiscal policies to overcome inflation. Number 1, budget by the government. Budget 2021, Malaysian Ministry of Finance government forecast a deficit of between 6.5% and 7% through that tax and reduce government expenditure. This strategy seeks to the lower total demand. This strategy is well suited to be used to lessen the effects of inflation on the nations given the current state of inflation in that nation. Number 2, expansionary fiscal policy approach to deal with the COVID-19. The government has unveiled 8 package of fiscal and economic stimulus measures totaling RM530 billions, increasing tax rates because consumer disposable income to decline, which has the effect of lowering consumers' demand and purchasing power. As a result, aggregate spending declines as well as government expenditure and demand can be lowered. Direct policies to overcome inflation. Price control. To prevent the price of things like rice, flour, milk, oil, and other regulated items from skyrocketing, the government will establish the price. The impact is that the farmer will receive a higher profit to survive. And the farmer cannot sell it below the price because it will affect their salary. Additionally, the goods subject to price control cannot be sold above the price because if they do it, the government will take legal actions against the farmers. Monetary policy to overcome unemployment. Lower the interest rate. Demand for the products and service may rise as a result for this tax cut. Excess tax, service tax, sales tax, income tax, and corporation tax are a few examples of taxes that the government can cut since they can raise consumer disposable income and super demand for products and services. Fiscal policy to overcome unemployment. Government providing assistance. The package Rancangan Ekonomi Prihatin Rakyat, which can reduce people's financial load in a variety of ways, such by providing free internet, delaying loan payment for 6 months, and other measures. Direct policy to overcome unemployment. Government need to limit the foreign workers. This is due to the fact that their presence will reduce work opportunities for Malaysians, which will inadvertently make it more difficult for the government to address the country's unemployment issues. discussion, which is we will see what happens to the inflation in Malaysia during COVID-19. As most of the world's nations are aware, including Malaysia, inflation is a problem. There are other variables that contribute to inflation, such as the cost of necessities. But at the time, the COVID-19 outbreak is the biggest culprit. In this video, we will explore the current macroeconomic difficulties, mainly inflation that Malaysia is facing. A general price level increase that is ongoing or continuous in an economy is referred to as inflation. This increase lowers the purchasing power of a currency as the cost of living increases. The majority of money is being spent on too few products in this scenario, which results in an inverse relationship between inflation and the purchasing power of money. For instance, low money value will result from high inflation or vice versa. The change in the average price of the market basket of goods and services bought by a typical urban household, such as food, shelter, clothing, medication, furniture, and transportation will be used to calculate the rate of inflation using the Consumer Price Index. In this diagram, we will analyze Malaysia's inflation rate for the COVID-19 era, which runs from 2019 to 2022. The graph shows that 2017 had Malaysia's highest inflation rate, which was 3.87%. It was mostly driven by a minor increase in transportation costs, reflecting a significant base of effect from fuel price decreases in 2016 on the cost of food and non-alcoholic beverage. 2 years later, between the years of 2018 and 2019, the inflation rate drastically decreased by 0.88% and 0.66% respectively. Since Malaysia experienced an economic catastrophe as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, inflation decreased to a negative 1.14%. The statistic division said that the inflation rate increased to 2.48% over the course of the year due to rising food and gasoline costs. According to reports, the pandemic was also responsible for the easing of interstate travel restrictions and the restoration of all economic sectors from the previous year, which helped the nation's recovery, particularly in the distribution and retail sectors. Finally, in 2022, the inflation rate declines by 0.23%, but only for the months of January through April. I will differentiate and characterize the level of inflation experienced by this nation throughout the course of the last 5 years using the Consumer Price Index, in accordance with the graph created using data from the Malaysian Employer Federation. The average Consumer Price Index rose by 1.2% and 0.8% respectively from 2017 to 2019. Given that the price increases are less than 2%, it can be said to be creeping inflation. Next, from 2019 to 2020, consumer purchasing trends declined by 1.4%. Finally, the difference in the average consumer price index between 2020 and 2021, which is equal to 3% of the difference, shows that the nation likewise experienced creeping inflation during these 2 years. The average consumer price index for 2022 can only be released before the month of May. Thus, it is impossible to predict how much inflation there will be in 2022. As a result, it may be said that Malaysia will primarily experience rising inflation through 2021.
Unemployment. The largest barrier to economic expansion has been the presence of unemployment. The economy will lose the potential of its gross domestic product when the labor force is not employed. As every worker has the ability to contribute their time and effort to the economy's growth, using limited human resources to deliver more goods and services more quickly. In other words, the growth of the gross domestic product is lower than it should be. The economy, the individual, and the country are all impacted by unemployment. This article will explore Malaysia's employment and development that occurred after the COVID-19 pandemic struck the nation. One important indicator of the state of the economy is employment. When a person actively seeks employment or is ready and able to work but is unable to locate acceptable positions paying a particular wage, they are said to be unemployed. The population between the ages of 16 and 65 who is not institutionalized and who is either employed or jobless but looking for work is referred to as the labor force. Those who do not currently have a job but looking for work is those who are not working because they are willing employed, not seeking jobs, or because they are enrolled in educational institution like college or universities. The reason why employment was so high in Malaysia throughout those years could be due to a number of factors. There are a number of hypotheses and scenarios that could account for Malaysia's high employment rate during the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the COVID-19 illness outbreak, it is the main cause of the rising employment rate in Malaysia. Although unemployment is frequently considered an economic problem, its effects go well beyond that because it has an influence not only on the community but also on an individual's quality of life, stress levels, and mental health, as it stands on of the hardest things in life to maintain job during bad economic times, and it is more harder to get work when unemployed is high. In the stress literature, unemployment is one of the primary discrete and objective life occurrence that calls for some form of social or physiological adjustment on the part of the individual. The stress process model Perling 1981 and 1989 is a popular justification for the connection between mental health and employment that is important in the current situation. Although the original studies theoretical mode focus on the impact of stress on Parkinson's disease patients, its conclusions are still relevant and valuable for explaining the stress brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic's consequences on employment. According to Perlin 1989, being out of work makes it more likely that one may experience stress-inducing elements including a lack of resources, limited opportunities, low self-esteem, and limited access to privilege and security. That is to say, being employed will probably lead to a number of losses, including those to social ties and financial security, and these losses may be unpleasant in and of themselves.
Conclusion. From our research, Malaysia, the state has played an active role in creating a positive environment for businesses. Various steps taken in the field of agriculture through modest land reforms and helping poor peasants with land and credits did help the rural community. The government policy of positive discrimination, also known as Bumi Putra,